The hammer struck the anvil with a rhythm that echoed through the dusty streets of Florissant, Colorado, and Grace Donovan refused to let the whispers stop her from working the red-hot iron into submission. It was 1878, and the mountain town nestled in the shadow of Pikes Peak had seen its share of unusual characters during the Silver Rush, but a woman working as a farrier still turned heads and sparked controversy. Grace had learned the trade from her father before consumption took him 2 winters ago, leaving her alone in a world that had no patience for a 23-year-old woman who smelled of horse sweat and coal smoke. She wiped the perspiration from her brow with the back of her leather-gloved hand, her auburn hair tied back in a practical braid that hung down to her shoulder blades. The makeshift forge she had set up on the edge of town was little more than a lean-to structure, but it was hers, paid for with the last of her father's savings. The problem was not her skill. Every horse she shod walked away sound and steady, their owners grudgingly admitting she had a gift for reading an animal's gait and knowing exactly how to balance each shoe. The problem was that she was a woman, and men in Florissant had their pride. "No one is going to hire you, girl," old Chester Morrison had told her just that morning, spitting tobacco juice into the dirt near her anvil. "It is not proper work for a woman. You should be teaching school or taking in laundry like a decent lady." Grace had bitten back her response, knowing that arguing would only cement their opinions. Instead, she had simply returned to her work, shaping a shoe for her own mare, one of the few animals she could practice on anymore. The jobs had dried up completely in the past month. Even the miners who had initially given her a chance out of curiosity had stopped coming, their wives complaining that it was unseemly for their husbands to spend time alone with an unmarried woman, even if that woman was elbow-deep in horse manure and focused entirely on her craft. The sun was beginning its descent behind the mountains when Grace heard the sound of multiple horses approaching. She looked up from her work to see a rider leading a string of 6 horses down the main street. The man sat tall in his saddle, his hat pulled low against the afternoon glare, and even from a distance, Grace could see the confident way he carried himself. As he drew closer, she could make out more details. Broad shoulders, a jaw shadowed with several days of stubble, and eyes that were studying the town with the careful assessment of someone who missed nothing. He reined in his horse directly in front of her forge, and Grace straightened, suddenly aware of how she must look with soot smudged across her cheek, and her work apron stained with old burns and oil. The man pushed his hat back slightly, revealing dark hair and a face that was weathered but undeniably handsome. His eyes, she noticed, were a striking hazel that seemed to shift between green and brown in the fading light. "You the Farrier?" His voice was deep and carried a slight drawl that suggested he had traveled up from Texas or perhaps Oklahoma Territory. Grace squared her shoulders, preparing herself for the inevitable dismissal once he realized his mistake. "I am." The man dismounted with fluid grace, his boots hitting the ground with a solid thump. He was tall, well over 6 feet, and moved like someone accustomed to long days in the saddle. "Name is Jack Xavier. I just bought the old Reynolds Ranch about 5 miles north of here. These horses need shoeing, and from what I can see, they need it badly." He gestured to the string of animals behind him, each one standing with the patient exhaustion of beasts that had traveled far. "Most men in town would not agree that I am suitable for the job," Grace said carefully, watching his face for the moment of recognition and rejection. Jack walked over to the nearest horse, running his hand down its foreleg before lifting the hoof to examine it. The shoe was worn nearly through on one side, causing the animal to favor that leg. "Most men are fools," he said without looking at her. "I care about whether you can do the work, not whether you wear skirts while doing it." He released the hoof and turned to face her fully. "Can you shoe horses, miss?" "Donovan. Grace Donovan." She felt something flutter in her chest, a sensation she firmly told herself was simply relief at the prospect of actual work. "Yes, I can shoe horses. I have been working with them since I was tall enough to reach a stirrup." "Then I am hiring you." Jack pulled off his gloves and extended his hand. "You will shoe every horse I own. I have got 23 head at the ranch, and from what I saw when I bought the place, most of them have been neglected. The previous owner drank more than he ranched, and the animals suffered for it." Grace stared at his outstretched hand for a moment before clasping it firmly. His grip was strong but not crushing, his palm calloused from years of ranch work. "Every horse," she repeated, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "Every single one." Jack released her hand and glanced around the modest forge. "Can you handle that much work? I will pay you fair wages, same as I would pay any farrier. Maybe more, considering you are probably better than most of the men who have been doing shoddy work and charging premium prices." "I can handle it," Grace said, her voice steady despite the sudden hope blooming in her chest. "When do you want me to start? These 6 need immediate attention. They have been on the trail for 3 weeks, and I pushed them harder than I should have to get here before the first snow. Can you do them tonight?" Grace assessed the light remaining and nodded. "I will need to work by lantern light for the last few, but yes, I can do them tonight." "Good." Jack reached into his pocket and pulled out a silver dollar, pressing it into her hand. "That is for starting immediately. We will settle the full payment when you finish." He paused, studying her face with an intensity that made her acutely aware of his presence. "You have got soot on your cheek, Miss Donovan." Without thinking, Grace reached up to wipe at her face, only succeeding in smearing the soot further. Jack chuckled, a warm sound that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Here." He pulled a relatively clean handkerchief from his pocket and handed it to her. "Though I suppose it is a mark of honest work, nothing to be ashamed of." Grace took the handkerchief, their fingers brushing briefly. She felt a spark of something she could not quite name, something that had nothing to do with the forge fire. "Thank you, Mr. Xavier." "Jack," he corrected. "If you are going to be working with my horses, we might as well be on a first-name basis." "Grace," she replied, offering a small smile. "Though you already knew that." She cleaned her face as best she could before turning her attention to the horses. Jack helped her secure the first animal, a large bay gelding with intelligent eyes and a nervous disposition. As Grace lifted the horse's hoof and began examining it, she was aware of Jack watching her every movement. It should have made her nervous, but instead, she felt a strange sense of calm, as if she was finally being seen for her skill rather than judged for her gender. "This one has been favoring his right front leg," Jack observed. "I noticed it about a week ago." Grace nodded, running her fingers along the frog of the hoof. "The shoe is pressing unevenly. It is causing a bruise here." She pointed to a darkened area. "Nothing that will not heal once he is properly shod. You were right to notice it." She set to work removing the old shoe, her movements practiced and efficient. The rasp sang as she trimmed the hoof, shaping it carefully before selecting a shoe from her stock. Jack handed her tools without being asked, anticipating her needs with the ease of someone who had spent time around forges and horses. They worked together in comfortable silence, the only sounds the crackling of the fire, the ring of hammer on metal, and the occasional stamp or snort from the horses. As full darkness fell and Grace lit the lanterns, casting dancing shadows across the forge, Jack finally spoke. "Why does no one in town hire you?" Grace kept her focus on the shoe she was shaping, sparks flying with each strike of her hammer. Because I am a woman. They think it is improper. They worry about their reputations, or their wives worry, or they simply cannot accept that a woman might be as good as or better than a man at this work. Their loss, Jack said simply. My gain. She glanced at him, seeing genuine acceptance in his expression. You do not care what people will say. A single man hiring a single woman to work on his ranch. I care about my horses being well cared for and my ranch running properly. What the gossips say does not factor into my decision-making. He leaned against the post, supporting the lean-to roof. Besides, I have never been much for following what everyone else thinks is proper. Life is too short to live according to other people's narrow ideas. Grace felt warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the forge fire. She finished shaping the shoe and carried it over to the bay gelding, testing the fit before nailing it in place. The horse stood steady, trusting her touch, and when she released his hoof, he put weight on it immediately without any sign of discomfort. You have got a gift, Jack said softly, admiration clear in his voice. That horse has been skittish about his feet ever since I bought him. He trusts you. Animals know when you mean them well, Grace replied, moving on to the next hoof. They do not care about gossip or propriety. They just know whether you are going to help them or hurt them. Wish more people were like that, Jack observed. They continued working as the night deepened around them, the mountain air growing cold. Jack retrieved a coat from his saddlebag and draped it around Grace's shoulders without asking, ignoring her protest that she was warm enough from the forge. The coat smelled of leather and sage and something distinctly masculine that made her pulse quicken in a way she tried to ignore. By the time Grace finished the last horse, it was well past midnight. She was exhausted but satisfied, her hands aching in the good way that came from work well done. Jack examined each horse's feet carefully, nodding his approval. Fine work, he said. Better than fine. These horses will be sound for months. He counted out coins from his pocket, pressing them into her palm. It was more than she had earned in the past 2 months combined. This is too much, Grace protested. It is exactly right, Jack countered. Quality work deserves quality payment. I will be back in 3 days with more horses. Can you handle 4 or 5 at a time? Yes, Grace said, clutching the coins. Jack, I cannot thank you enough. You do not know what this means to me. He met her eyes, and in the lantern light his face was serious. I think I might. Everyone deserves a chance to do what they are good at, regardless of what parts they were born with. My mother raised me to judge people by their character and capabilities, not by whether they fit into some predetermined box. Grace felt tears prick her eyes but refused to let them fall. Your mother sounds like a remarkable woman. She was, past tense. Jack's expression flickered with old grief. She ran our ranch in Texas for 5 years after my father died. Every man in the county said she could not do it, that she should sell and move to town. She proved them all wrong and turned a profit every year. She taught me that determination and skill matter more than tradition. I would have liked to meet her, Grace said softly. She would have liked you. Jack gathered the lead ropes of his horses. I should get these animals back to the ranch. Will you be all right here alone? I have been alone here for a long time, Grace said, though something in her chest ached at the thought of him leaving. I will be fine. Jack hesitated as if wanting to say something more, then nodded. 3 days, then. And Grace, do not let anyone in this town make you doubt your worth. You are the finest farrier I have seen in 5 states. He mounted his horse and rode off into the darkness, the string of horses following behind with their new shoes ringing clear against the rocky ground. Grace stood watching until the sound faded, then turned to bank her forge fire, Jack's coat still warm around her shoulders. She told herself to give it back next time, even as she knew she would sleep with it draped across her bed that night. breathing in the scent of sage and possibility. The next morning brought the predictable storm. Grace was organizing her tools when Chester Morrison appeared with 3 other men from town, their faces set in stern disapproval. "We heard you took work from that newcomer Xavier," Chester said without preamble. "Shod his horses well into the night, just the 2 of you alone out here." Grace straightened, meeting his gaze without flinching. "I did my job, which is shoeing horses, the same job I have been trying to do for months while everyone in this town turns their backs on me." "It is not proper," another man, Samuel Hutchins, interjected. "A single woman working alone with a single man at all hours. What kind of message does that send?" "It sends the message that I am a farrier, and Mr. Xavier needed his horses shod," Grace replied, her voice sharp. "There is nothing improper about honest work." "The wives are talking," Chester said, lowering his voice as if imparting some great secret. "They are saying you are setting a bad example, that you are being inappropriate. This is a decent town, Miss Donovan. We have standards." "Standards that leave me unable to earn a living at the trade I was raised to." Grace felt anger rising in her throat. "Standards that say I should starve or become dependent on charity rather than use the skills I have. Those are not standards, Mr. Morrison. That is cruelty dressed up as righteousness." "Now you listen here, girl," Samuel started, stepping forward with his finger raised. "No, you listen." Jack's voice cut through the morning air like a whip crack. He had approached on foot, his horse tied at the end of the street, and now he stepped between Grace and the men with the calm confidence of someone accustomed to facing down trouble. "Miss Donovan is working for me, and unless one of you is paying her wages, you have got no say in it." Chester puffed up his chest. "This is town business, Xavier. You are new here. You do not understand how we do things." "I understand perfectly," Jack said, his voice dangerously quiet. "I understand that you are all cowards who are threatened by a woman who works harder and has more skill than most of you combined. I understand that you are hiding behind false propriety to justify keeping her down. And I understand that if any of you interfere with my business or harass my farrier again, you will answer to me directly." "Your farrier," Samuel scoffed. "You cannot be serious. What will people think?" "I do not care what people think," Jack said flatly. "I care about my horses and my ranch. Miss Donovan is the best farrier in this town, possibly in this whole territory, and she is going to shoe every horse I own. If that offends your delicate sensibilities, I suggest you look elsewhere when you see her working." The men muttered among themselves, clearly unprepared for such direct confrontation. Chester tried once more. "The decent women of this town will not associate with her if she keeps on like this." "Then the decent women of this town are not as decent as they think they are," Grace said, finding her voice again. "I am not doing anything wrong, and I will not apologize for surviving." Jack glanced at her, something like pride shining in his eyes, before turning back to the men. "This conversation is over. You all have a good morning now." It was not a suggestion. The dismissal in his tone made it clear that any further argument would not end well for them. The men retreated, but not before Chester shot Grace a look that promised this was not finished. When they were gone, Grace sagged slightly, the adrenaline draining from her body. "You did not have to do that," she said quietly. "You have only just arrived in Florissant. You do not need to make enemies defending me." "I did not make enemies," Jack corrected. "I made my position clear." "There is a difference." He studied her face, noting the exhaustion and worry she was trying to hide. "Have you eaten breakfast?" The question caught her off guard. Not yet. I was planning to eat after I finished organizing." "Come on, then." Jack held out his arm. "The hotel serves a decent meal. We can discuss the schedule for the rest of my horses." Jack, if I walk into that hotel with you, it will only make things worse. People will talk. People are already talking. He kept his arm extended. Might as well give them something worth talking about. Besides, you worked until past midnight for me. The least I can do is buy you a proper breakfast. Grace looked at his offered arm, then at his face, seeing nothing but genuine invitation there. She thought about her father, who had taught her to never let fear make her decisions. She thought about the long, lonely months of being shunned by the town. And she thought about how Jack had stood up for her without hesitation, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. She took his arm. Walking into the fluorescent hotel dining room on Jack Xavier's arm felt like walking into a lion's den. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Every eye in the room turned to watch as Jack led Grace to a corner table with a view of the mountains through the window. He pulled out her chair with easy courtesy, seemingly oblivious to the stares and whispers. "What can I get you folks?" The waitress, a tired-looking woman named Martha who had always been kind to Grace, approached with her order pad. "2 of your special breakfasts," Jack said, "with extra coffee." "It is going to be a long day." Martha nodded, her eyes flicking between them with curiosity but no judgment. "Coming right up." As they waited for their food, Jack leaned back in his chair, his posture relaxed. "Tell me about your father," he said. "How did he end up teaching his daughter to be a farrier?" Grace was grateful for the neutral topic, something to focus on besides the continued stares from the other diners. "He did not set out to teach me specifically. My mother died when I was young. A fever took her. It was just the 2 of us after that. He worked as a farrier and blacksmith, and I spent all my time at his forge because there was nowhere else for me to be. I started helping because I wanted to be near him, and he discovered I had an aptitude for it. No brothers or sisters. I had an older brother, Thomas. He was going to take over the business." Grace's voice grew quiet. "He drowned in the Arkansas River when I was 12. He and some friends were swimming after a hot day of work, and the current was stronger than they realized." "I am sorry," Jack said, and the simplicity of his sympathy felt more genuine than all the elaborate condolences she had received over the years. "After Thomas died, my father threw himself into his work. He taught me everything, not because he planned for me to be a farrier, but because it helped him to pass on what he knew. I think it made him feel like the knowledge would not die with him." Grace accepted the coffee Martha brought, warming her hands on the cup. "When the consumption took him 2 years ago, I was already doing most of the work. The transition should have been natural. But people who had been happy to let me work alongside my father suddenly decided it was inappropriate for me to work alone." "Because you were no longer under male supervision," Jack said, his tone bitter. "As if you somehow became less skilled the moment your father passed." "Exactly." Grace took a sip of the strong coffee. "I have been surviving on my savings and the occasional job from people passing through town who do not know the local politics. But the savings are nearly gone, and winter is coming." She met his eyes. "You arriving when you did might have saved my life, Jack. I want you to know that." He reached across the table and covered her hand with his. The touch sent warmth radiating up her arm. "You saved yourself by being too stubborn to give up. I just provided an opportunity for you to show what you can do." Their breakfast arrived, plates heaped with eggs, bacon, fried potatoes, and thick slices of bread. Grace realized she was ravenous, and for a while they ate in comfortable silence. The other diners gradually returned to their own meals and conversations, though Grace could feel occasional glances still directed their way. "What brought you to Colorado?" Grace asked when she had taken the edge off her hunger. "If you do not mind my asking." "Looking for a fresh start," Jack said. I ran my family's ranch in Texas for years after my mother died, but everything there reminded me of her. Every corner of the house, every pasture. I needed somewhere new, somewhere I could build something that was mine without being haunted by ghosts. He gazed out the window at the mountains. When I heard about the Reynolds place being for sale, something about the description called to me. Mountains, good water, room to grow. It felt right. You plan to run cattle and horses. I want to breed quality horses, the kind that can handle this mountain terrain but still have speed and stamina. It will take years to build the bloodlines I want, but I've got time. He turned his attention back to her. I will need someone who understands horses to help keep them sound. Someone who can look at an animal and know what it needs. You are offering me steady work. Grace's heart began to pound. I am offering you a position as my ranch farrier if you want it. Regular wages, steady work. You would need to come out to the ranch several days a week, but you could keep your forge here in town for any other business you might get. Jack's expression was serious now. I know it is asking a lot. The ride out there is not easy, and it will give the gossips more ammunition. But I need someone I can trust with my horses, and Grace, I trust you. Tears burned in Grace's eyes. She blinked them back furiously, not wanting to cry in the middle of the hotel dining room. Yes, she said, her voice rough with emotion. Yes, I want the position. Thank you, Jack, thank you. His hand tightened on hers. No thanks necessary. You earned this with your skill. He smiled then, a genuine expression that transformed his face from merely handsome to something that made her breath catch. Besides, I have a feeling we are going to do good work together. They finished their breakfast discussing logistics. Jack would return the next day with his wagon to transport Grace and her essential tools to the ranch. She would spend 3 days there working on his horses, then return to town for a few days before going back out again. It was more work than she had hoped for, more security than she had experienced in 2 years. As they left the hotel together, Grace felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. Hope. Over the next 2 weeks, Grace fell into a rhythm that exhausted and exhilarated her in equal measure. She worked at Jack's ranch from dawn until dusk, moving through his herd of horses with systematic precision. Each animal received her full attention, every hoof carefully trimmed and balanced, every shoe perfectly fitted. Jack worked alongside her most days, handling the horses and anticipating her needs with an almost uncanny awareness. They talked while they worked, sharing stories and dreams and comfortable silences. Grace learned that Jack was 26, that he had fought briefly in the Apache campaigns before deciding the military life was not for him, that he could play the harmonica and was terrible at poker. Jack learned that Grace could read Latin thanks to a school teacher who had boarded with her family one winter, that she had a weakness for peppermint candy, that she sang while she worked when she thought no one was listening. The attraction between them grew like a banked fire, slow and steady and inevitable. Grace found herself noticing things she had no business noticing. The way Jack's shirt stretched across his shoulders when he lifted heavy equipment, the laugh lines around his eyes, the gentleness of his hands with anxious horses. She caught him watching her sometimes with an expression that made her heart race, but he never said anything inappropriate, never crossed the line of professional courtesy. It was driving her slowly mad. One afternoon, Grace was working on a particularly difficult horse, a young stallion Jack was hoping to use as a breeding animal. The horse was nervous about having his feet handled, dancing and pulling away every time Grace tried to secure a hoof. She was getting frustrated, her back aching from the constant bending and dodging when Jack stepped in. "Here, let me try something." He moved to the horse's head, placing one hand on the animal's neck and beginning to speak in a low, soothing voice. The words were not English, she realized. Some other language, rhythmic and soft. The stallion's ears flicked forward, his nervous energy gradually settling. Jack continued speaking, his hand moving in slow circles on the horse's neck, until the animal stood quiet and calm. Grace lifted the hoof again, and this time the stallion allowed it without resistance. "What language was that?" she asked, focused on examining the hoof. "Apache," Jack said. "I learned it during my time in the campaigns. I spent more time talking to Apache prisoners than fighting, and some of them taught me their language. Horses do not care what language you speak to them, as long as the tone is right." Grace glanced up at him, seeing something shadowed in his expression. "You did not like being a soldier." "I hated it," he said flatly. "Hated what we were doing, hated the waste of it. Good men dying, families destroyed, all over land and pride and fear." He shook his head. "I got out as soon as my enlistment was up and swore I would never raise a weapon against another person again, unless I had no other choice." She returned her attention to the hoof, carefully trimming the excess growth. "That must have been hard, being part of something you disagreed with." "We all do things we regret. The measure of a person is whether they learn from those mistakes or repeat them." Jack's hand continued its soothing motion on the stallion's neck. "I learned that violence rarely solves anything worth solving, and that there is more courage in building something than in tearing it down." Grace fitted the shoe carefully, aware that the horse was only staying calm because of Jack's continued presence and soothing words. As she worked, she felt a surge of affection for this man who had appeared in her life like an answer to a prayer she had been afraid to voice. He was good and kind and principled, and he saw her as an equal rather than a curiosity or a threat to natural order. She was falling in love with him, she realized. Perhaps had been falling since that first night when he handed her his handkerchief and told her that soot was nothing to be ashamed of. The thought terrified her. That evening, as Jack drove her back to town in his wagon, the setting sun painting the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, Grace tried to sort through her feelings. She had not allowed herself to think about romance in years. Her work had consumed her life, and the few young men who had shown interest before had quickly retreated when they realized she had no intention of giving up her trade. The idea that she could have both seemed like a fantasy, something that happened in the novels she occasionally borrowed from the general store but never in real life. "You are quiet tonight," Jack observed, glancing at her from the corner of his eye. "Everything all right?" "Just tired," Grace said, which was not entirely a lie. She was tired, bone-deep weary from the long day of work, but that was not what was occupying her mind. "I pushed you too hard today," Jack said, concern evident in his voice. "That stallion took too much time. You should have told me you needed a break." "I am fine, Jack, really." Grace managed a smile. "I have worked longer days than this." They lapsed into silence as the wagon rattled over the rough road. The evening air was growing cold, the first real hint of the winter that would soon lock the mountains in snow. Grace pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders, trying not to shiver. Without a word, Jack reached behind the seat and pulled out a blanket, draping it across her lap. His hand lingered for just a moment longer than necessary, and when Grace looked up, she found him watching her with an intensity that stole her breath. "Grace," he said, his voice rough, "I need to tell you something." Her heart began to pound. "What is it?" He seemed to struggle with the words, his hands tightening on the reins. "I hired you because you are the best farrier I have ever seen. That is the truth, and it is the only reason I needed. But these past 2 weeks, working alongside you, getting to know you." He trailed off, then started again. I've come to care for you as more than just someone who works for me. I think about you when you are not there. I look forward to our days together more than I probably should. And if I am completely wrong about this, if you do not feel anything similar, just tell me and I will never mention it again. We will keep things purely professional. But Grace, I need you to know that I am falling in love with you. Grace felt as if all the air had been sucked from her lungs. She stared at him, seeing the vulnerability in his expression, the fear that he had overstepped and ruined everything. Joy and terror warred in her chest. I thought I was imagining it, she whispered. The way you looked at me sometimes, I thought it was just my own wishful thinking. Jack pulled the wagon to a stop, turning to face her fully. You are not imagining anything. Grace, you are the strongest, most capable, most fascinating woman I have ever met. You do not back down from what you believe in, even when the whole world tells you that you are wrong. You have more courage in your little finger than most men have in their entire bodies. And yes, you are beautiful, so beautiful that sometimes I have trouble focusing on the horses when you are nearby. So if you feel even a fraction of what I feel, I am asking you to give this a chance. Give us a chance. Grace reached out and placed her hand on his chest, feeling the rapid beat of his heart beneath her palm. I feel more than a fraction, she said. Jack, I am falling in love with you too. I have been fighting it because it seemed impossible, because I have spent so long believing I would have to choose between my work and everything else. But you make me believe that maybe I do not have to choose, that maybe I can have both. The smile that spread across Jack's face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing across her cheekbones with infinite gentleness. You can have both, he said fiercely. You can have your work and love and anything else you want. I will never ask you to give up what makes you who you are, Grace. Never. He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise. Grace felt tears slip down her cheeks, but they were happy tears. Tears of relief and joy and wonder that this was real, that this man was real, that she was allowed to have this. The kiss deepened, and Grace wrapped her arms around Jack's neck, losing herself in the warmth and rightness of being held by him. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Jack rested his forehead against hers. I have been wanting to do that since the morning I watched you stand up to those men in town, he admitted. You were magnificent, Grace laughed, the sound bubbling up from somewhere deep inside her. I was terrified. You were magnificent, he repeated firmly. And brave and strong and mine if you will have me. Yours, Grace agreed, kissing him again. And you are mine. They sat there in the wagon as the last light faded from the sky, wrapped in each other's arms in the blanket, talking in whispers about the future they would build together. Jack spoke of expanding the ranch, of the horses they would raise, of building a proper forge where Grace could work comfortably even in winter. Grace spoke of her dreams of being recognized for her skill, of proving that women could excel at any trade if given the chance, of finding a place where she truly belonged. You belong with me, Jack said, kissing her temple. Wherever I am, you belong there too. It was full dark by the time they reached Florissant. Jack walked Grace to her small cabin at the edge of town, reluctant to leave her even for the night. At her door, he kissed her once more, slow and thorough, a promise of all the kisses to come. I will be back tomorrow, he said. We need to finish the last of the horses, and then I have something I want to show you at the ranch. What is it? Grace asked, curious, a surprise. Jack's eyes glinted with mischief. You will just have to trust me. I do trust you, Grace said, and realized it was absolutely true. She trusted him with her heart, with her dreams, with her future. It should have been terrifying, but instead it felt like coming home. She watched from her doorway as Jack rode away into the night, then went inside and lit her lamp with hands that shook slightly. The cabin was cold, the fire long since burned down to ashes, but Grace felt warm from the inside out. She prepared for bed in a daze, her mind replaying every word, every touch, every kiss. When she finally crawled under her quilts, she fell asleep with a smile on her face and Jack's name on her lips. The next morning dawned clear and cold, the kind of autumn day where every breath puffed out in white clouds and the mountains stood sharp against a brilliant blue sky. Grace dressed with unusual care, choosing her better work dress and taking extra time with her hair before bundling it under her usual scarf. She was waiting outside her forge when Jack arrived, and the smile he gave her when he saw her made her knees weak. "Good morning," he said, dismounting and crossing to her in 3 long strides. He cupped her face and kissed her thoroughly, right there in the middle of the street where anyone could see. "I have been thinking about doing that since I left last night." "Jack," Grace said, laughing and blushing. "People will see." "Let them see," he said, but he stepped back and offered his arm. Ready to finish those horses, they loaded her tools into his wagon and headed out to the ranch. The ride seemed shorter today, the familiar landscape made new by the happiness bubbling in Grace's chest. Jack kept one arm around her shoulders as he drove, keeping her close against the cold morning air. At the ranch, they worked through the remaining horses efficiently. Grace was aware of Jack's eyes on her constantly, warm and appreciative in a way that had nothing to do with her farrier skills. When she straightened from trimming a hoof, he was there with water. When she paused to stretch her aching back, his hands found the tight muscles and kneaded them gently until she sighed with relief. "You are going to spoil me," she said. "That is the idea," he replied, pressing a kiss to the nape of her neck that sent shivers down her spine. They finished the last horse just after midday. Grace cleaned her tools and packed them carefully while Jack put the horses back out to pasture. When he returned, he was carrying a basket she had not noticed before. "Come with me," he said, taking her hand. "I want to show you that surprise." He led her along a path that wound up a gentle slope behind the main ranch buildings. They walked for perhaps 10 minutes, the path meandering through aspen groves that gleamed gold in the autumn sunlight. Finally, they emerged into a clearing that offered a stunning view of the valley below and the mountains beyond. But that was not what made Grace gasp. In the center of the clearing stood the foundation and partial frame of a building. It was not large, but the construction was solid, the logs carefully chosen and fitted. Grace could see where a forge would go, where windows would let in light, where a work area would allow for easy movement around a horse. "You are building a forge," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I am building you a forge," Jack corrected. He set down the basket and came to stand behind her, his arms wrapping around her waist. "The ranch needs a proper farrier setup, and you need a place where you can work comfortably. This spot has good drainage, decent wind for the forge fire, and the best view in the territory. I started it last week before I even met you. I just knew I would need a forge and I wanted it to be something special. Now it feels right, like I was building it for you all along." Grace turned in his arms, tears streaming down her face. "Jack, I do not know what to say." "Say you will help me finish it," he said. "Say you will work here and build a life here with me." He took a deep breath. "Say you will marry me, Grace. I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other 2 weeks, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep with you in my arms every night. I want to build this ranch together, raise horses together, grow old together. Marry me." Grace looked up at this man who had changed her entire world in the span of 2 weeks, who had given her back her dignity and her hope and her dreams. She thought about all the reasons she should say no, should be cautious, should take more time. And then she thought about what her father had told her when she was young. When you know something is right, when you feel it in your bones, do not let fear talk you out of it. Yes, she said, laughing and crying at the same time. Yes, I will marry you, Jack Xavier. I will marry you and build a life with you, and shoe every horse you own for the rest of our lives. Jack let out a whoop of joy and lifted her off her feet, spinning her around until they were both dizzy and laughing. When he set her down, he kissed her with a passion that made her forget the cold air and the mountains and everything except the feel of his mouth on hers, his hands in her hair, his heart beating against hers. I do not have a ring yet, he said when they finally broke apart. I will take you into Colorado Springs, let you pick out whatever you want. I do not need a fancy ring, Grace said. A simple band will do. Jack, I do not need anything fancy or elaborate, I just need you. You will have me, he promised. Every day for the rest of our lives you will have me. They spread out the blanket from the basket and shared the lunch Jack had packed, talking about their wedding and their future with the easy intimacy of people who had known each other far longer than 2 weeks. Jack wanted to marry soon, before the heavy snows came. Grace agreed, seeing no reason to wait when they were both certain of what they wanted. We will have to deal with the town gossips, Grace said, picking at the bread and cheese Jack had brought. They will say I trapped you, that I used my feminine wiles to secure a husband and a home. Let them say whatever they want, Jack said. Anyone with eyes can see that I am the one who pursued you, not the other way around. And anyone with sense can see that you are with me because you want to be, not because you need to be. You are not dependent on me, Grace. You are choosing me, and that makes all the difference. She leaned against his shoulder, feeling a contentment she had never experienced before. When do you want to get married? As soon as possible. Next week, if we can arrange it. Jack played with her fingers, his touch sending pleasant tingles up her arm. We can go to Colorado Springs, find a preacher, do it properly. Then we will come back here and start our life together. Next week, Grace repeated, testing the words. They felt right. Yes, next week. They stayed in the clearing until the sun began to sink toward the mountains, reluctant to leave the private world they had created. Finally, as the air grew cold enough to make even their blanket insufficient, they packed up and made their way back to the ranch house. Jack gave Grace a tour of the home that would soon be hers. It was a solid structure, built by the previous owner during his more industrious years before drink got the better of him. The main room was spacious, with a large fireplace and windows facing the mountains. There were 2 bedrooms, a kitchen with a good stove, and a porch that wrapped around 3 sides of the house. It needed work, repairs and cleaning and a woman's touch, but Grace could see the potential in every room. We will make it beautiful, Jack said, watching her face. Whatever you want, however you want to arrange things. This is your home now, Grace. Our home, she corrected, squeezing his hand. He drove her back to town as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. At her cabin, he kissed her goodnight with a reluctance that matched her own. 1 week, he said. 1 week, and then I am never letting you out of my sight again. 1 week, Grace agreed, though it seemed like an eternity. The week passed in a whirlwind of preparation. Grace closed up her forge in town, selling off the equipment she would not need at the ranch and packing the rest. Jack made trips to Colorado Springs to arrange for the wedding and purchase supplies for the ranch and their life together. They saw each other every day, stealing moments together whenever possible, their love growing deeper with each conversation, each shared dream, each kiss. The town gossips were in full force, as Grace had predicted. Women whispered behind their hands when she passed. Men shook their heads and made comments about the speed of the courtship. But Grace found that she did not care. Let them whisper. She was happy, truly happy for the first time since her father died, and no amount of narrow-minded judgment could touch that joy. 2 days before the wedding, Chester Morrison cornered Grace outside the general store where she was buying fabric for new curtains. "This is not going to last," he said without preamble. "You have bewitched that poor man somehow, but he will come to his senses. Then where will you be?" Grace looked at him with pity rather than anger. "I will be exactly where I am now, Chester. In love and loved in return. I am sorry you cannot understand that a man might genuinely value a woman for more than her ability to be decorative and obedient, but that is your limitation, not mine." She walked away before he could respond, her head held high. Behind her, she heard someone chuckling and turned to see Martha, the waitress from the hotel, watching the exchange. "Good for you," Martha called out. "About time someone put that old windbag in his place. You and Mr. Xavier seem happy together. Do not let anyone tell you different." "Thank you," Grace said, feeling a rush of gratitude for the unexpected support. "I know what it is like, being a woman trying to make her own way," Martha said, coming closer. "I have been on my own since my husband died in a mining accident 6 years ago. This town does not look kindly on women who do not fit their neat little boxes. But you found someone who sees you for who you are. That is rare and precious. Hold on to it." Grace nodded, her eyes stinging with tears. "I will." The night before her wedding, Grace lay awake in her cabin, watching moonlight creep across the floor. Tomorrow her life would change forever. She would become Grace Xavier, wife and partner in Farrier. The future stretched ahead of her, full of possibility and promise and love. She thought about her father, wishing he could be there to see her married, to see that his daughter had found someone who valued the skills he had taught her. She thought about her brother, gone so many years, and her mother she barely remembered. They would have liked Jack, she was certain. He was exactly the kind of man her family would have welcomed. Morning came too slowly and too quickly all at once. Grace dressed in a new gown she had made for the occasion. Simple but elegant in deep blue fabric that brought out the color of her eyes. She left her hair down, knowing Jack loved it that way, with only a small ribbon to keep it from her face. Jack arrived with the wagon just after dawn, and the sight of him in a proper suit nearly stopped her heart. He looked handsome and nervous, and so full of love that Grace had to blink back tears. "You are beautiful," he breathed, helping her into the wagon. "So beautiful, Grace." They made the journey to Colorado Springs mostly in silence, their hands clasped together, neither needing words to express what they felt. The preacher was a kindly older man who asked no questions about the speed of their courtship, simply smiled and nodded when Jack said they wanted to be married today. The ceremony was brief and simple, conducted in the small church with only the preacher's wife as a witness. But when Jack slipped the plain gold band onto Grace's finger and promised to love and honor her for all his days, when Grace promised the same in return, it felt as sacred and binding as any elaborate ceremony in a grand cathedral. "You may kiss your bride," the preacher said, and Jack did sweetly and thoroughly, holding Grace as if she was something precious and miraculous. "My wife," he said when they finally pulled apart. "My Grace." "My husband," she replied, testing out the word and finding it perfect. They spent the night in a hotel in Colorado Springs, Jack carrying Grace over the threshold with a grin that made her laugh. He made love to her with patience and passion, introducing her to pleasures she had never imagined. They talked in whispers in the dark, making plans and sharing dreams and simply reveling in the fact that they had the rest of their lives to learn each other. The next morning, they headed back to the ranch, to the home that was now truly theirs together. Jack lifted Grace from the wagon and carried her into the house despite her laughing protests that she could walk perfectly well. "Tradition," he said, setting her down in the main room and kissing her nose. "Welcome home, Mrs. Xavier." Grace looked around the house that would be the center of her new life and felt such overwhelming happiness that she could barely breathe. "Welcome home," she echoed. They settled into married life with surprising ease, as if they had been together for years rather than weeks. Grace worked on finishing the forge, sometimes with Jack's help, and sometimes alone when his ranching duties called him away. The structure took shape beautifully, becoming everything she had dreamed of in a workspace. By the time the first serious snow fell in late November, the forge was complete and functional, with windows that let in morning light and a stove that kept the space warm even on the coldest days. Grace's reputation as a farrier began to spread beyond Florissant. Ranchers from neighboring properties heard about the woman who could diagnose and treat hoof problems that others missed, who had a gift for handling difficult horses, who did work that lasted longer than most farriers could manage. They came despite their initial skepticism, drawn by the recommendations of their peers and the knowledge that the Xavier ranch horses were the soundest in the region. Some still made comments about a woman doing man's work. Some still looked down their noses at Grace and refused to hire her on principle. But increasingly, her skill and Jack's unwavering support opened doors that had been firmly closed before. She was building a reputation based on merit, and it felt like vindication for all the struggle that had come before. Winter in the mountains was harsh and isolating. Snow piled high around the ranch buildings, and some days it was impossible to travel beyond the immediate property. But Grace found she did not mind. The enforced solitude meant more time with Jack, long evenings by the fire talking and reading and making love. He taught her to play chess and lost every game, which made her laugh. She taught him some of the Latin she had learned, and they amused themselves by speaking in broken Latin phrases when they wanted privacy, even though there was no one around to overhear. Christmas came, and Jack surprised Grace with a new set of Farrier tools, the finest she had ever owned, ordered specially from a craftsman in Denver. Grace gave him a harmonica she had found in Colorado Springs, made of polished silver with intricate engravings. They spent the day together, just the two of them, cooking a simple meal and exchanging gifts and giving thanks for the unexpected blessing of having found each other. "This time last year, I was alone and miserable," Jack said as they lay together by the fire that evening. "I was going through the motions of living but not really feeling alive. Then I came to Colorado and I found you, and everything changed. You are the best gift I have ever received, Grace, the best thing that has ever happened to me." "You saved me," Grace said softly, running her fingers through his hair. "Not just my business or my livelihood, but me. You made me believe I was worth something again, that I deserved to be seen and valued and loved." "You are worth everything," Jack said fiercely. "Never doubt that." As winter gradually gave way to spring, the ranch came alive with new energy. Calves were born, and 2 of the mares foaled, producing strong, healthy babies that Jack declared would be the foundation of his breeding program. Grace spent long hours in her forge as the weather improved and neighbors began bringing horses again. Her hands were perpetually stained and calloused, her back often ached by the end of the day, but she had never been happier. In early May, Grace realized her monthly courses were late. She waited another week to be certain before telling Jack, wanting to be sure. When she finally shared the news as they sat together on the porch watching the sunset, Jack's face transformed with such joy that it brought tears to her eyes. "A baby," he said, placing his hand reverently on her still flat stomach. "Grace, we are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" she asked, though his expression made the question unnecessary. Happy does not begin to cover it, he said, kissing her deeply. I am overwhelmed, overjoyed, terrified. All of it at once. He pulled back to look at her seriously. Are you happy? I know this will complicate things with your work. I am ecstatic, Grace assured him, and we will figure out the work situation. Women have been having babies and working for thousands of years. I will not be the first Farrier to work while pregnant. As her pregnancy progressed through the summer, Grace continued working, though she and Jack both insisted she avoid the most strenuous tasks. She focused on consultations and trim work, leaving the heavier shoeing for Jack to do under her direction. Some of their clients were scandalized that a pregnant woman was still working at such physical labor. Others were admiringly surprised at her dedication and skill. Grace found pregnancy simultaneously wonderful and miserable. She loved feeling the baby move inside her, loved placing Jack's hand on her belly so he could feel the kicks and rolls. She hated the morning sickness that lasted well into the afternoon, the way her back ached constantly, the fact that her favorite work dress no longer fit by her 6th month. Jack was attentive to the point of being overprotective, hovering whenever she worked and trying to forbid her from lifting anything heavier than a cup of tea. They had their first real argument when he suggested she stop working entirely until after the baby was born. I am pregnant, not dying, Grace said sharply. Women have been doing physical work throughout pregnancy since the beginning of time. I know my limits, Jack. Trust me to know what I can and cannot handle. I do trust you, he said, running his hands through his hair in frustration. But Grace, what if something happens? What if you hurt yourself or the baby? I could not bear it if I lost either of you. She softened, seeing the genuine fear beneath his overprotectiveness. Nothing is going to happen. I promise I will be careful. I promise I will stop if it becomes too much. But I need to work, Jack. Not just for the money, though that helps. I need to feel useful and skilled and like myself. Pregnancy is changing my body in ways I cannot control. Let me keep this one thing that makes me feel strong. He had pulled her into his arms, careful of her swollen belly. I am sorry. You are right. I just worry. I know, she said, kissing his jaw, but you have to trust me to take care of myself and our baby. He did try, though she could see him biting his tongue sometimes when she did something he considered too risky. But he was there to help whenever she needed it, and his pride in her never wavered. In late October, as the aspen trees turned gold again, and the air began to carry the bite of approaching winter, Grace went into labor. It was 2 weeks before the baby was due, but the midwife Jack had hired from Colorado Springs assured them that this was perfectly normal. The labor was long and difficult. Grace had thought she knew what pain was from years of hard physical work, but this was something entirely different. Jack stayed with her throughout, holding her hand and wiping her face with a cool cloth and whispering encouragements, even as she gripped his hand hard enough to leave bruises. When their son finally entered the world in the early hours of the morning, his cry strong and indignant, Grace felt something shift in her heart. She had thought she understood love when she married Jack, but this was different, deeper, a fierce protectiveness and wonder that overwhelmed her. He is perfect, Jack said, his voice choked with tears as the midwife placed the baby in Grace's arms. Grace, he is perfect. You are perfect. I love you so much. They named him Thomas after Grace's brother and Robert after Jack's father. Thomas Robert Xavier, tiny and red-faced and absolutely beautiful. Jack held his son with the same gentle competence he showed with horses, talking to the baby in soft tones and looking at him as if he was the most miraculous thing in the world. The first months of parenthood were exhausting and challenging, and filled with more joy than Grace had thought possible. Thomas was a good baby overall, but he wanted to eat constantly and had his days and nights mixed up for several weeks. Grace and Jack took turns walking with him at night, pacing the floor while Thomas fussed or sang to him until he settled. Grace's work necessarily slowed after Thomas was born. She could not spend full days in the forge anymore, not with a baby who needed her attention every few hours. But she found ways to adapt, working in shorter sessions and bringing Thomas with her in a basket when the weather was good. Jack took over more of the actual shoeing work, with Grace directing and consulting. It was not the arrangement she had envisioned, but it worked, and she was surprised to find she did not resent the compromise. Being a mother did not erase her identity as a farrier. It simply added another dimension to who she was. As Thomas grew, becoming a chubby, happy baby who smiled at everyone and reached for everything, Grace found her rhythm. She worked when she could, mothered constantly, and loved Jack more with each passing day. Their life was not perfect. Money was sometimes tight, especially in the winter when work slowed. They argued sometimes about small things made large by exhaustion and stress. Thomas got a fever one terrifying night, sending them both into a panic until it broke the next morning. But through it all, they had each other. Jack never stopped supporting Grace's work, never suggested she should give it up permanently to focus solely on domestic duties. Grace never took that support for granted, never forgot how lucky she was to have found a man who valued her for all of who she was. When Thomas was 18 months old, Grace realized she was pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect. She worked throughout, though she let Jack do even more of the physical labor than before. Their daughter was born on a beautiful spring morning in 1881, arriving so quickly that they barely had time to summon the midwife. "We have a daughter," Jack said, his voice full of wonder as he cradled the tiny girl. "Thomas has a sister." They named her Clara, after Jack's mother, and Me, after Grace's mother. Clara Xavier was smaller than Thomas had been, with a cap of dark hair and her father's hazel eyes. Thomas was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to help with everything and bringing her his favorite toys to play with even though she was far too young to appreciate them. Life settled into a new rhythm with 2 children. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. Jack's breeding program was showing results, producing horses that were gaining a reputation throughout Colorado for their quality and soundness. Grace's name as a farrier spread even further, and she found herself consulting on difficult cases from as far away as Denver, traveling when she could and teaching Jack what to do when she could not. The townspeople of Florissant gradually came to accept the Xaviers. Grace would never be entirely forgiven for defying convention, but success had a way of softening judgment. When the local blacksmith died, and Grace offered to take on some of his more basic work in town to help the community, the town council actually discussed hiring her officially. They ultimately decided against it, but the fact that they considered it at all marked a significant shift. Chester Morrison never did warm to Grace, but he stopped openly opposing her. Samuel Hutchins actually brought his horses to her after his regular farrier botched a shoeing so badly the horse went lame. He never apologized for his earlier behavior, but the act of hiring her felt like an apology of sorts. Martha, the waitress who had offered Grace encouragement before her wedding, became a good friend. She often visited the ranch, bringing small gifts for the children and staying to talk with Grace about the challenges of being a woman who did not quite fit society's mold. "You give me hope," Martha told Grace one afternoon as they watched Thomas and Clara play in the yard. "Seeing you living your life on your own terms, doing work you love, married to a man who supports you. It makes me think maybe there is hope for all of us who do not quite fit the pattern everyone expects. There is always hope, Grace said. Sometimes you just have to be stubborn enough to hold on to it until it becomes real. The years passed in the way years do when you are busy and happy, each season blending into the next. Thomas grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved horses and had his father's gentle way with animals. Clara was more wild, constantly climbing things she should not and asking questions that had no easy answers. Jack's hair started showing touches of gray at the temples, making him look distinguished. Grace's hands grew more scarred and calloused, each mark a badge of honor representing horses helped and work done well. In 1884, when Thomas was 5 and Clara was 3, Jack came home from town with unexpected news. The property adjacent to their ranch was for sale, nearly doubling their potential land. It was an opportunity they could not pass up, but it would require a loan from the bank, something neither of them had done before. "We can do this," Jack said as they discussed it that evening after the children were asleep. "The ranch is profitable. Your farrier work brings in steady income. We can make the payments. This would set us up for the future, give us room to really grow the horse breeding operation." "Then we should do it," Grace said, though the idea of debt made her nervous. "We will make it work. We always do." They purchased the land, and the additional property did exactly what Jack had hoped. The expanded pastures allowed them to increase their herd, and the additional resources meant Grace could take on more work without worrying about it interfering with ranch operations. They hired help for the first time, a young man named David who was good with horses and willing to learn. With David handling some of the routine ranch work, Grace found she could return to shoeing more regularly. She still worked around the children's needs and schedule, but it felt good to spend more time doing the work she loved. Her skill had only improved with the years, and she found deep satisfaction in being able to solve problems that stumped other farriers. One day, a man arrived from Colorado Springs with a horse that was chronically lame. 3 different farriers had tried to diagnose the problem without success, and the owner was preparing to put the animal down rather than let it suffer. Grace examined the horse carefully, taking her time to watch how it moved and where it was reluctant to bear weight. Finally, she found the issue. A tiny crack in the hoof wall that was too small to see easily but was causing pain with each step. She carefully trimmed around the crack, applied a special shoe to take pressure off that area, and advised the owner on how to treat the hoof as it grew out. 6 weeks later, the man returned with a sound horse and a recommendation that spread Grace's name to an even wider audience. "That woman is a miracle worker," he told anyone who would listen. "Saved my best horse when everyone else said it was hopeless." The recognition was gratifying, but what mattered most to Grace was the knowledge that she was helping animals that needed her skill. Each sound horse was a victory, each solved problem a reminder of why she had fought so hard to keep doing this work. In 1886, Thomas started school in town, which meant Grace had to adjust her schedule to bring him in each morning and collect him each afternoon. Clara went with them, chattering constantly and making friends with everyone they encountered. Jack's horses continued winning recognition, with buyers coming from as far as Kansas and Wyoming to purchase stock. Life was full and busy and good. Grace and Jack stole moments alone when they could, riding out to their favorite spots on the ranch or sitting together on the porch after the children went to bed. Their love had matured from the passionate intensity of those early days into something deeper and more enduring, a partnership built on mutual respect and shared dreams, and the intimate knowledge that comes from building a life together. You ever regret it? Jack asked one evening as they watched the sunset paint the mountains in shades of pink and gold. "Marrying me so quickly, tying yourself to this life?" Grace looked at him in surprise. "Never, not once. Why would you even ask that?" "I took you away from town, away from the possibility of a more conventional life. You have to work so hard, balancing everything. Sometimes I wonder if you would have been happier if you had stayed independent, focused solely on your career." Grace took his hand, threading her fingers through his. "Jack Xavier, you are the best thing that ever happened to me. This life, this family we have built, working together on this ranch and raising our children and growing old together, this is everything I could ever want. I love my work, yes, but I love you and Thomas and Clara more. You did not take anything from me, you gave me everything." He kissed her then, sweet and slow, and she felt the same flutter in her heart that she had felt on their first kiss 8 years earlier. "I love you," he said, "more than I can ever fully express." "I know," she said. "I love you too." Always. As the 1880s drew to a close, the Xaviers were firmly established as one of the most successful ranching families in the region. Jack's horses were sought after across multiple states. Grace's reputation as a farrier extended throughout Colorado and into neighboring territories. Thomas, now 9, was showing signs of having inherited both his parents' way with horses and was already learning basic farrier skills from his mother. Clara, 7, was declaring that she was going to be a veterinarian when she grew up, a profession that was only just beginning to accept women. In 1889, Grace discovered she was pregnant again, a surprise after several years of thinking their family was complete. This pregnancy was harder than the previous two, perhaps because she was now 34 and not as young as she had been. She tired more easily and had to cut back significantly on her work. But the baby was healthy, and in early 1890 they welcomed another daughter, whom they named Hannah Grace Xavier. Hannah was a calm baby, content to observe the world from her mother's arms or her father's shoulder. Thomas and Clara adored their baby sister, fighting over who got to hold her and help care for her. Grace found herself with 3 children under 10 and wondered how she would manage to balance everything. But manage she did, because that was what she had always done. She worked when she could, mothered constantly, and relied on Jack's partnership to make it all possible. He had never been a father who left child-rearing entirely to his wife. He changed diapers and soothed crying babies and helped with homework and told bedtime stories. They were partners in every sense of the word, sharing both the burdens and joys of raising a family. As the century turned and 1900 arrived, Grace looked back on the past 2 decades with wonder. She was 45 years old, a wife and mother and skilled craftswoman. The young woman who had stood alone at her forge in Florissant, wondering if she would survive the winter, seemed like someone from another lifetime. So much had changed, and yet the core of who she was remained the same. She was still stubborn, still determined, still passionate about her work. But now she was also loved and secure, and part of something larger than herself. Thomas was 17, preparing to take over more of the ranch operations, and showing real talent for horse breeding. Clara was 15, fierce and independent, and determined to attend veterinary school no matter how many people told her it was not appropriate for a young lady. Hannah was 10, sweet-natured and artistic, with a gift for sketching horses that captured their individual personalities perfectly. Jack's hair was more gray than brown now, and Grace had threads of silver running through her auburn hair. They both moved a bit more slowly than they once had, joints stiffening with age and years of hard work. But when Jack looked at Grace, she still saw the same love and admiration that had been there from the beginning. And when she looked at him, She felt the same flutter in her heart, the same absolute certainty that he was her partner, her love, her home. One spring morning in 1901, Grace was working in the forge when a young woman rode up to the ranch. She looked to be in her early 20s, dressed in practical riding clothes, with a set of Farrier tools strapped to her saddle. "Are you Grace Xavier?" the young woman asked, dismounting with easy grace. "I am," Grace said, setting down her hammer and studying her visitor curiously. "My name is Elizabeth Winters. I am trying to establish myself as a farrier, but I am having the same problems you had when you started. No one will hire a woman, no matter how skilled she is." Elizabeth met Grace's eyes directly. "I have traveled 3 days to get here because I heard you had succeeded against those same odds. I was hoping you might have advice, or perhaps even be willing to take me on as an apprentice. I can pay for my training with work. I'm not afraid of hard labor." Grace felt tears sting her eyes. She saw herself in this young woman, the same determination and desperation and refusal to give up. "You do not need to pay me," she said. "If you are serious about learning, I will teach you. But I warn you, it is not an easy road. People will judge you and dismiss you and make your life difficult simply because you are a woman doing work they think belongs to men." "I know," Elizabeth said, "but I love this work and I am good at it. I am not going to let narrow-minded prejudice stop me from doing what I was meant to do." Grace smiled, hearing an echo of her younger self in those words. "Then welcome to the Xavier Ranch, Elizabeth. Let us get you settled, and tomorrow we will start your training." Over the next year, Grace taught Elizabeth everything she knew, passing on not just the technical skills but the hard-won wisdom about navigating a world that did not want to make space for women farriers. Jack helped with the teaching as well, and Thomas proved to be a patient instructor when it came to handling difficult horses. Elizabeth proved to be a dedicated student, and by the time she left to start her own business in Wyoming, Grace felt confident she would succeed. "You are changing the world," Jack told Grace as they watched Elizabeth ride away. "One horseshoe at a time, maybe, but you are proving that women can do anything they set their minds to. Elizabeth is not going to be the last woman you teach. Your legacy is going to extend far beyond the horses you have shod." "Our legacy," Grace corrected. "None of this would have been possible without you believing in me from the beginning." "You would have succeeded regardless," Jack said. "You are too stubborn to fail." "I just had the good fortune to be there to watch." Grace laughed and leaned into his embrace, breathing in the familiar scent of him. "We have had a good life, haven't we?" "The best," Jack agreed. "And it is not over yet. We have got years ahead of us still." He was right. They did have more years, years that they filled with love and work and watching their children grow into capable adults. Thomas married a kind woman named Sarah and took over the ranch operations, proving himself to be as skilled a rancher as his father. Clara did go to veterinary school, one of only a handful of women in her class, and eventually opened a practice in Colorado Springs. Hannah married a schoolteacher and moved to Denver, where she sold her art and raised 4 children of her own. Grace continued working as a farrier into her 60s, finally retiring when her joints made the physical labor too painful to continue comfortably. Jack retired from active ranch management around the same time, content to advise Thomas while spending his days with Grace. They traveled some, visiting their children and grandchildren, but always returned to the ranch that was the center of their world. In 1920, on a warm summer evening with the mountains turning purple in the fading light, Grace and Jack sat together on the porch they had shared for over 40 years. Grace was 75, Jack was 78, and they had been married for 42 years. Their hands were joined, fingers interlaced with the comfortable familiarity of decades together. "You remember the first night we met?" Grace asked. "When you rode up to my forge with that string of horses and told me you would hire me. I remember thinking you were the most beautiful woman I had ever seen, even covered in soot and wearing an apron stained with burns," Jack said. "I remember you looked at me like you expected rejection but were prepared to fight anyway. I knew right then that you were someone special. You changed my life that night," Grace said softly. "You gave me hope when I had almost none left. You saw me for who I really was, not what everyone else thought I should be." "You changed my life too," Jack said. "I came to Colorado looking for a fresh start, looking for something to make me feel alive again. I found you, and you were everything I had been searching for without knowing it. You are the great love of my life, Grace. My partner, my best friend, my wife. Every day with you has been a gift." Grace felt tears slip down her cheeks, but they were happy tears, the tears of a life well lived and love deeply felt. "I love you, Jack Xavier. I have loved you from the moment you handed me that handkerchief and told me soot was nothing to be ashamed of. I love you, Grace Xavier. I will love you until my last breath and beyond," Jack said, and he leaned over to kiss her, gentle and sweet, as the sun set on another day in their long life together. They sat there as darkness fell, hands clasped and hearts full. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built a life that defied convention and exceeded dreams. The love story of the woman Farrier and the cowboy who believed in her had become the foundation of a family, a legacy of determination and partnership, and the radical idea that women could be anything they chose to be. And as the stars came out above the Colorado mountains, Grace and Jack Xavier knew that their story, their love, would endure long after they were gone, living on in their children and grandchildren, and in every woman who refused to let others define her limits. They had succeeded not just in building a ranch or raising a family, but in proving that love and respect and partnership could overcome any obstacle, could create a life richer and fuller than either could have imagined alone. It was, they both agreed silently as they sat together in the gathering dark, a very good life indeed.